Thanks, Esteban. Good morning, everybody. You're here. Each of us is striving to grow our businesses and add value to our customers. Yet there's something out there that's difficult to define. It's very confusing at times. Sometimes there's a whirlwind of publicity around it, which is hard to get our arms around. It's thrown in our face almost daily, even sometimes reaches the highest levels of government. That phenomenon is Kanye West. But seriously, we all need to be thinking about innovation and how it affects our businesses. Esteban mentioned that just a couple years ago, it was a very different playing field. What he didn't say is he actually wrote an article pointing out that enterprises were not looking to service providers for innovation. I caught up with Esteban the other day, and as he told you, he told me back then, it's changed. Today, enterprises are looking to service providers for innovative ideas, technologies, and practices. You might not agree with that. We want to have a dialogue not only with the panel, but also with you. So please be ready for questions soon. Just raise your hand and wait for the microphone, and we'll take questions in a few minutes. First, Patrick, if you would start introducing yourself and sharing your definition of innovation.
Thanks, Ron. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. So I think most of you know me, one of the young bucks in this whole advisory relations world, but I'm honored to be up here representing what I now redescribe as the new tier, not the tier twos anymore, in terms of the service provider landscape. Advisor relations is one of the parts of the function of marketing, obviously, for some of you it's sales, but it's been our foundation in terms of our external communication to the market. So I've been with ISG in terms of relationship for quite some time, learned a lot. I hope the other way as well in terms of who we are, what we do. Now, how do you define innovation? So I'm not an enterprise architect, nor am I a data scientist, nor can I offer you an enterprise technical SOW to respond to innovation. But because I'm in marketing, and we may be going through, and I say may be going through, an exercise that I think Todd led for ISG about a year and a half ago, wink, wink, you need to start reading about these things from a very different point of view. So when I think about innovation, it's not really about solving the complex business challenges and innovating upwards on the technology stack and all the continuous generic terms we deal with. So I'm looking at this actually from a utopia perspective, that the enterprise itself needs a leader who has courage to believe in principles. How can I really take this to the next level? How do I answer that question, what if? And because human beings are sometimes unpredictable and systems of record are sometimes messy, you need people underneath you in order to drive that innovation. So for me, it's not about a technical question, right? It's about how do we as a provider, and I suppose ISG as an advisory analyst firm, make the people understand, responsible for driving the change, that this is critically important. So you can only innovate, regardless of the technical blueprint, if the people responsible for it can be engineered in a way that's striving for a utopia. And you need that from top down and leadership principles. So my approach is not technical. It's much more soft in the sense of those engaged in the innovation for the enterprise.
So Chris, I know your approach may be technical from your background in product management. If you could introduce yourself and share your definition of innovation.
Sure. So despite rumors to the contrary, my name is Christopher Smith. I care for the real-time communications portfolio at CenturyLink. I've been in telco more years than I'd like to admit. For me, innovation, if we think back to all of the presentations we saw yesterday, it's about all of our ability to leverage technology, our people, processes, and assets and to change and transform in the way that the market and our customers expect us to. You can't sort of sit still. In the way that we've done business traditionally isn't going to be the way that we need to do business in the next few years. And I'll give you an example. If you think about telco, we are famously bad or famously hard to do business with. If you want to consume networks, you fill out order forms, you fill out spreadsheets, and hopefully in some number of days we've got assets up for you to consume. Anymore, our customers are cloud providers and software providers and technology companies, and they don't want to do business that way anymore. So one of the things that we've done is we've invested in an API ecosystem called Hyperion. And the idea is it's a marketplace and an ecosystem for our customers and our partners to consume networks in a real-time way via API. So that's just one example of how we're thinking about innovation.
So that's a great segue to you, Ola, and what you do at ISG. Could you introduce yourself and talk about the work you do with enterprises and how they see innovation?
So as a partner with ISG in the digital solution and strategy space, a lot of the clients that I talk to have some of the similar viewpoints of innovation. But interestingly, I think clients, for the most part, are looking at innovation across every spectrum you could possibly imagine. They're looking for service providers who are technically innovative. They're looking for them to be business innovative. They're looking for new ways to do things, as well as new value that they could derive out of the old ways of doing things. So they're really looking for service providers who understand what's happening within their business and align new ways and new things to that business value. So it's a really broad spectrum. We've had a tendency in the past to try to contract innovation, which I've always found interesting, where we've written it into contracts to say you must innovate. And yet everyone has a different definition of what innovation is. And I find when I get under the covers a bit with clients, what they're really looking for is their service providers who understand their environment to bring forth their best ideas about how they can provide better value to the business, how the service provider can provide better value to the client. So it's a really broad spectrum in most clients that I talk to.
So it is a broad spectrum, and I think that's a good point. This magazine that I have on my lap is interesting. It's from the Consumer Technology Association. Its title is "It is Innovation." Just in this latest issue, there's articles about 5G, quantum computing, using your voice to shop, 3D printed bridges we talked about earlier, human machine interfaces in cars. I know you do some work in that area, Patrick. So how do you, in your different roles, how do you come up with, Chris, starting with you, taking these ideas forward from somebody's new idea to execution?
Well, there's a number of different ways that happens inside of CenturyLink. So one of the things, innovation needs to start with culture. So we've set up an organization inside of CenturyLink called the Office of Innovation. So it's a formal group, and the idea is we allow our employees to bring new ideas to the company, and there's a team that helps them vet these ideas so we can place strategic bets. And not all of them are going to be good ideas, not all of them are going to pan out. But a culture of innovation requires that you do make some gambles and you invest in some things that are going to win and some things that don't. For me, in a product role, it starts with talking to customers and listening to them and solving their problems. Technology isn't technology for technology's sake. It's how you apply it to solve customer problems that kind of really matter. So we're using, I'll just pick at AI because we've heard a little bit about that yesterday. Inside of our real-time communications portfolio, we've got an AI engine that watches all of the calls that go into the network on our call center platform. And what we're looking for is we're taking that data, turning it into information, and we're looking for actionable insights, things that we can do with that data that matter to customers. So we've got a large financial customer, for example, and they came to us and said, yeah, great, you know, your pricing is competitive, but we need you to help us solve our customer experience. So we look at the calls that come in to their agents, and we look for their customers and their callers' intent. When they called in last month, did they have a bad experience? And if so, we can flag that for the agent when the call comes in. If they call every month and they're looking to pay that bill, we can route them right to the application that allows them to do that and save them, you know, 6 or 8 different clicks.
So I just wanted to step in here. A lot of those systems must be legacy systems that are handling that information. I mean, how does that play into innovation? How do you look at innovation in terms of all those legacy systems? And I know you have experience at Ola, I'm sure you do too. So what's kind of a quick...
There's no magic there. So, I mean, if you think about this, CenturyLink is a, 90-year-old, you know, historically a LEC that's transforming itself into a technology company. And, you know, it's a little bit at a time. And it's about focusing, you know, your investments in the areas that are growing that matter most to customers, you know, and cleaning up the rest behind you.
What do enterprises think about, obviously a lot of the clients you work with have legacy systems, but they say they want to innovate. So how do they do that?
Well, it's an interesting dilemma in that I like to say it's not as if their business is going to come to them with a bucket of money. So one of the things that they're really looking for is how do I innovate in my current environment to make it as efficient as possible and in fact harvest funding for R&D or innovation centers or incubation centers where I can do some of this practicing or testing or points of view or POCs. And so it's really that interesting dynamic that they're looking for service providers to help them with. How do I make my current environments and the current services you're providing me so efficient that I can actually harvest some of your people, some of your capabilities to go and effectively fund other work. What I hear from service providers is, of course, well, we don't want to tell our client of the innovations that we're making in their current environment because, you know, after all, they're going to ask us for a price hit if we do that. So I'm not even going to tell my client about some of the automation I'm putting in place. But I think if you are open with your client and set the expectation of what that actually frees up for them, then I think it can be a win-win situation. I do see clients who are establishing innovation centers or incubation centers to do some R&D type of work outside of the auspices of what they do day in and day out because their environments are so complex, and so they're a little worried about trying to insert something that's truly technology innovative in the middle of their legacy environments. But eventually the thought process is that you do either replace or integrate what you're doing in those innovation centers into their legacy environment. So I see both of those areas being as equally important to clients, both what's happening within their legacy environments as well as new technologies or indeed new revenue generating capabilities out of their legacy environments. They're interested in both.
And I know, Patrick, you've been sitting there thoughtfully thinking about all of this. This is an advertisement about the city of Las Vegas trying to attract businesses. Is it showing up on the? There it is. Same magazine. Las Vegas is advertising itself as the place to go if you want to be an innovative business. And I know, Patrick, you have a lot of experience at Luxoft with teams in different locations. What is the role of location in terms of setting up these innovation centers that Ola talked about?
So the value prop from our organization used to be nearshore delivery. And that was basically centered around where, with a little bit of emphasis on who. And when you start to talk to analysts and advisors at 6,500 people, 300 million 5 years ago, and grow at the CAGR rate that we have, as all the new tiers often do, when you get close to 1 billion and triple the head count, et cetera, and your locations now move into what's called global, where it's not about where anymore. So nearshore could have been Ukraine to the UK, it could be Mexico to North America, it could be India to Australia. Is that really a value add anymore around locations? Not really. It's a piece of the larger scale. But what's more important now is actually who are you hiring and why? And that bottom pyramid struggle that we all have to some extent, depending on where your focus is, we've really had to diamond that, and in some instances, flip that HR pyramid. Because in order to get through the constructs of everything we've been talking about, legacy systems, budgets, to innovate, and principled leadership around that, you need to come to the table with someone who's going to drive that budget owner to make the change. And you can't do that when you rely on the old school model of service delivery, which is bottom pyramid, et cetera, et cetera. So for us, nearshore is just a piece of a global model depending upon the location, but it's more about the talent pool you bring in. What do you want to put on your CV? I drove HMI development for an OEM, or I was responsible for help desk management, on year 5, when that really should be a year 1 type of opportunity. So when you find those people and you get these types of projects and you sit them across from the people making the decision, that's how you defeat all these walls that are blocking the innovation. And that makes you drive these principles of we must make this change together. So for us, it's been incredibly useful and humbling to have access to, quote, the software engineering population just by virtue of the types of work that we pursue.
So if the people you need are in Las Vegas, you'll go find them.
No doubt. There is talent all over. Rural sourcing is not something that Gartner coined 5 years ago and stopped using it. There's talent everywhere. And the tough part is, in terms of the millennial piece that we're all dealing with now, is aggregating that talent into working in some type of quasi-corporate environment. Because some of these people are still interested in pure crowdsourcing and open source, and to have a legacy conversation with them is almost a waste of their time and yours.
But it also brings up a good point in really around collaboration. So one of the things that I see happening in most client environments is they're expecting all of their service providers to play in the sandbox together, but they're also expecting you to invite them in the sandbox. They have knowledge about their business that you just don't have. And so innovation is not any one group or any one person's job. It's everyone's job. And innovation centers that I see happening are a combination of business knowledge from within the client organization, technology leadership from within the client organization, as well as service providers. And I make that plural on purpose. It's as many of their service providers as they can to take them through an innovative thought process. It's pretty rare that it's one service provider who comes to a client and says, I can solve, soup to nuts, whatever it is that you're attempting to solve for the business. It's usually done in collaboration. It's usually a group of people that's solving it.
Yeah, and I would probably get chastised in terms of leading marketing when saying anyone who claims end-to-end is full of crap. They're not able to do that, right? Neither can we. And when you talk, I don't still think it's service providers, but it's everything like AWS and Microsoft and Google and Pivotal and Murex and Calypso and OpenLink and AutoZar. That's the ecosystem that puts you on top to be able to garner that real ability to execute end-to-end. You can't do it on your own. I can't do it on my own. And I think this is a nice ecosystem that's doing it well together.
All right, so at this point, I'd like to get some discussion going with the audience. If you have a question, please raise your hand. A microphone will be brought to you. And if you don't ask questions, I will. So any questions out there at this point? I don't see any. All right.
Is that a good thing?
I don't know. We were answering all the questions, I suppose. Fantastic.
Because it's Cynthia Batty with ISG, and a good advertisement for why you get a flu shot. So I think a lot about innovation. I've written a lot about innovation. And and as Ola knows, I've worked on innovation language and contracts, and I now discourage it because I don't think you can contract for innovation. And so, the more I've thought about it, I probably get in trouble for saying this, but I don't even believe in innovation anymore. I think it's continuous improvement. And I think that innovative environments have to have constraints in order to maximize the innovation impact or the continuous improvement impact. All of this is dependent on an environment in the client where they're receptive to that. If the client's not receptive, you can bring every idea in the world, and I've seen so many providers bringing wonderful ideas and getting shot down. So I'm interested in your thoughts about how you would change your approach to get a client's environment to be more focused on creativity, on continuous improvement, and on innovation.
Chris?
For me, and I just came off of a week of talking to customers on the West Coast, all of the concepts that we're reviewing in this room, all of the new technologies, and it was interesting to me across several different industries, whether it was gaming or casinos or staffing, all of the companies I spoke with are dealing with all of these challenges real time. They're trying to put budgets together to understand, learn, and consume some of these technologies in a way that helps their business transform. So I'm not finding, for me personally, that we have to push customers to get there. They're pushing us to go faster. And they want us to be partners, and they want us to teach them and help them learn.
I think what I find is that what doesn't seem to work, and lots of service providers haven't figured this out, which I find troubling, is that going to your client and giving them a solution to a problem they haven't described to you, and having a fully baked solution, to them sounds nothing more than a sales pitch. It sounds like spend some money, instead of talking to them about the problem that you're perceiving as their service provider. So I find that the conversation needs to switch, where we're talking about understanding their business, understanding either the problem they're trying to solve or the innovative ways in which you can help revenue streams or growth or whatever their objectives are, and then pulling the innovation in around that subject works much better than coming in and telling them how great you are at some whiz-bang new technology. If you don't align it to what their business value is, then they stop listening. They hear blah, 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 blah. That's all they really hear. And they don't really listen to what you can actually do for them. You've got to really align it to that business value.
What was that Nancy Reagan thing, just say no, whatever it was? There's service providers that have a tendency to always say yes, right? That's a great idea, Mr. Client, Mrs. Client, let's execute and we'll do a great job. But in some instances, you have to tell the client, no, that's not a good idea. That's a very bad idea, and here's the reason why, and this is what we propose. So what we have found, given brute honesty in these types of discussions at the boardroom table, has actually proven a big plus. So it's a little bit of a hype, right? But nevertheless, you're going to trust someone who's honest, and not always just nodding their head and showing you the next pitch and deck, et cetera.
You've all talked about the different, oh, I'm sorry.
Question.
Another question, all right. Wait for the microphone.
So first, a quick observation. Patrick, you introduced yourself as the young buck, and then you quoted Nancy Reagan. I just want to put that out there.
I was two.
So Bill Huber with ISG. I worked for a provider at one point in my career in delivery, and every month, as part of our management reporting, we had to report on continuous improvement. Now, in this case, what continuous improvement meant was simply how am I reducing my internal costs and level of staffing on my different delivery engagements to improve margin. And that was really all the company cared about. So which may not be what we always describe to our clients when we're talking about continuous improvement. So I was just wondering if perhaps each of the panelists could give one or two examples of what they believe continuous improvement is.
Chris?
Sure. So again, we're in the telco space. We do big networks for big enterprises. So I completely agree with your assessment. Pivot back 5 years. We're providing, layer 2 and layer 3 networking to enterprise, mostly to their data centers so they can consume applications. The world is changing. The world has changed. More often than not, our customers are moving applications to the cloud. It's not just one cloud provider. It's many or all of them. But they still have the same expectations around application performance, having networks always up, always available, always easy to consume. And they don't want to wait 60, 90 days for access to these applications. We have to go faster. So, back to my point earlier, figuring out what customers want and how you invest is a big part of what we do all day. So we just announced a launch last week, a product called Dynamic Connections. We have built into all of the major cloud providers globally, layer 2 connectivity. We've worked with them on APIs so that today, if you're on that to CenturyLink's network, you can go into our portal, and in 3 seconds, you can turn up bandwidth to any of the cloud providers. So as opposed to using the human glue that we've used in legacy systems to turn up those things in 60, 90, 120 days, we're doing it in seconds now. And that was us transforming ourselves and listening to customers as the kind of the world changed.
So the best example I think I could give is, well, one, we have an internal CI department, so it fits right exactly how you described it in terms of making things lean. But I would say from an automotive perspective, obviously you don't create the digital cockpit software in January and then all of a sudden the car is produced in November and it's leased in December of the same year. So there's a fairly lengthy amount of projections you need to do with the way that technology is going to get integrated along with the marketing and the manufacturing, the OEM and the tier 1, the number of buyers, the number of leases, the insurance policies, et cetera, et cetera. So for us, in that instance, CI is really about being able to project that with the client and really having a lengthy discussion with their R&D people from a theoretical point of view as to, where is the next 5 years going to be? So it's it's less of a practical, everyday type of CI, but the value for us has been in the longer term projection. How do we improve continuously on this long timeline? So automotive is the best example I can give on that.
So I see clients in continuous improvement taking two sort of trajectories. They're either on I'll call it the legacy way of doing continuous improvement, which is very consistent metrics, and they're trying to improve those metrics, whether it's productivity or defects or quality or whatever those metrics happen to be. More and more I see clients who are moving toward continuous improvement in what are business metrics and metrics that are specific to the capabilities that they're measuring. And so what I mean by that is that I'll have very different continuous improvement intent around how I might deal with my HR systems than I will in dealing with connected car applications. Very different metrics and a very different continuous improvement intent. One might be really innovative and very business value oriented. The other might be more productivity oriented or efficiency or stability oriented. So I think it depends. It's that multiple ways of looking at it and getting far more specific about the business need and then the business intent behind it. That's where I see most CI programs moving, rather than being one consistent way of addressing CI.
Are there any other questions at this point? So I'm part of the research organization. We just finished up a very interesting study that Dave Lewis talked about yesterday about RPA use in automation. And one of the issues that we asked about was this whole concept of innovation causing trepidation in people. In that case, it's people concerned about losing their jobs, being eliminated, that sort of thing. We actually found out in the research that that's not the case at all, that companies are moving people not out, but up, over to other responsibilities. And the folks that had been doing those roles were actually relieved to not be doing those mundane tasks anymore, for the most part. So what's the human element of innovation? Ola, how do enterprises deal with those threats or perceived threats to having something new come in?
I think our research would be accurate in what I see with clients. The problem is not people being fearful of innovation, particularly in our technology organizations. So in our technology organizations, our technologists, they want to be using the latest, greatest technologies. They don't want to be stuck in the legacy environment, keeping the legacy systems up and running, right? They want to be over in that DevOps team doing, continuous integration and continuous deployment. What I do see happening is some innovation happening because of a fear of actually losing some of their most qualified employees or even service provider employees because of that need by technologists to actually understand new and innovative technologies. So it actually starts to be a pull from the technology groups themselves to pull innovation into their day-to-day work. When it comes to the business side, I would agree. There might be a few areas where I've seen our clients be worried about fear, uncertainty, and doubt in the business end where they see automation come in. But for the most part, where that's started to happen, it's clear that we see those people just being moved into higher value positions or work that's being done.
Patrick, we've talked a lot about the role of enterprises, technology, all the different issues. What are some of the external forces, if you will, the governments, the partners, the other players in the ecosystem? How do they play into innovation, either from a positive perspective or as barriers?
So one of the partners that we work with, who I'm sure most of us have some type of correlation to, actually found themselves stuck in the mud, I guess, in the sense of they're trying to push so much innovative marketing language out there that they actually can't fill the booth setting, if you will, with the providers who can do that stuff. And they seem to be churning through different levels and different groups as to who to find to fill this spot that can offer X because we went to market with it, right? We've already told this to the customers. And the biggest challenge is in the partner world, it's easy to sign the agreement. It's easy to say we're partners and tweet about it. But ultimately, to find that concrete engagement is heavily dependent on the coordination factor, what they're doing externally and saying, what we're doing externally and saying, and what does the client actually want? So what I see sometimes in this partner marketing perspective is it's being over-marketed in a way that's not even representing the actual client need. And we're in search, I think, of someone to actually help moderate that and figure out how do we level set expectations of the partner clients, our clients, the co-clients that we have together. It's been a bit of a struggle because I think the easiest part is to announce it and sign it, like I said, but finding the common ground has been difficult sometimes. And that's one of the areas that we're trying to focus on is optimizing the partner model, which everyone is pretty big on nowadays. Mm-hmm.
Chris, I know you had some thoughts on this question too. These other factors at play, these other forces, how do they affect innovation? Governments, other companies, competition.
In our space, innovation is mostly driven by our customers, and I guess there's a couple of different things that we see. The buyers in the companies we do business with are getting younger and younger. So I just read a study recently that by 2020, 50% of the folks that we do business with that are employed in enterprises are going to be millennials. So they have a different expectation in how they do business with us. They're very comfortable with technology. They've grown up with it. and the legacy way that we have all done business doesn't really work with them anymore. More and more, despite the kind of business that our customers are in, everyone is transforming into needing to be a technology company, and that comes with different expectations. So just looking at some of the grades that were read out earlier, the F to B minus, I think, is what was on the screen. For me, those grades kind of point to the fact that the expectation in our space is so incredibly high. And for us, that just means we do need to innovate, and we need to transform ourselves faster than we ever had before.
Interesting. So we've talked about you mentioned automotive, the technology space. I mean, does innovation have different rates, different acceptance in certain industries more than others? How does that work? Ola, you have?
Yeah, I mean, you do have obviously risk-averse businesses, highly regulated businesses that will take a far more pragmatic view of where they want to innovate, how they want to innovate. So it's not that that's not a factor. A great example would be just the industry trends toward cloud and public cloud, and how certain industries shied away from it for quite a long time before they finally became comfortable with the fact that there was solid enough security for them to feel comfortable there. I think you see that. That's pretty common in those high risk averse types of companies.
So I think Jeff and John and Jason and a few more Jays and I were talking about the fate of Sears last night. And one of Jeff's points was around e-commerce for Sears was something that they had before the word online really even existed. And it's interesting to see how the brick and mortar piece had a lot of these innovative traits, and they're now collapsing left and right, and they're having to reinvent themselves. So for me, I would say retail is probably craving the most innovation anywhere in order to survive, reshape, and pivot than any of the other industries. And I'm curious to see, I mean, can we raise our hands? Who thinks Sears is gone forever? All right. And who thinks Sears is staying forever? Okay. Well, there we go.
Interesting. So clearly we all need to be thinking about innovation, how it affects our businesses, and appreciate participation of the panel, the audience. We're here to answer questions afterwards if you'd like. Chris, Patrick, Ola, thank you very much. Special shout out to Cynthia for coming up with the idea for this panel, and appreciate your participation. Thank you.